subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The last stand, the smell of burnt ozone and scorched metal lingered in the air. The planet's twin suns hung low in the sky, casting a blood-red glow across the barren landscape. Flames flickered from wrecked ships and abandoned machinery, remnants of the brutal battle that had taken place just hours before. The once bustling outpost, now reduced to nothing more than a cratered ruin, was eerily silent. Save for the distant hum of shattered systems still sputtering to life, Captain Elias Jones staggered through the wreckage, his boots sinking into the dust with each step. His uniform was torn, a reminder of the brutal fight he had barely survived. His pulse thudded in his ears, each breath sharp and ragged. Blood stained his hands, a grim reminder of the comrades he had lost, and the dangers that lurked on every corner of this forsaken planet. The radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "Captain, we've got a breach in the North Sector." "Repeat, breach in the North Sector. We need backup." Elias didn't answer. His focus was elsewhere. His eyes scanned the scorched earth sitching. It was a simple mission: secure the outpost, eliminate the threat, and get out. But something had gone horribly wrong, and now he was alone. He felt the pull of exhaustion in his bones. He knew he should turn back, report to command, and get back to safety. But there was something that held him there, a nagging feeling that he couldn't shake. Something told him that his mission wasn't over. Through the smoke and haze, he spotted movement. At first, it was a mere shadow, something small and crawling through the ruins. His hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but then he saw it clearly: a figure, an alien, broken and battered, dragging itself across the dirt. Its body was covered in blood, but the worst part was its legs. The lower half of the creature was nothing but mangled stumps, a gruesome reminder of the ferocity of the battle. Elias froze. He knew what it was: a warrior from the Zalith species, a group of alien invaders who had been terrorizing the galaxy for years. But this one was different. She wasn't attacking, she wasn't fighting, she was running from something, or someone. And Elias couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward her, despite the years of war. The countless lives lost to the Zalith. Elias had never been one to revel in the idea of slaughtering an enemy without reason. There had always been something about the warriors that confused him. They weren't just mindless killers. There was intelligence in their eyes, a sense of purpose that made him question the narrative his superiors had fed him. But now, as he watched the aliens struggle, he saw nothing but desperation. His hand clenched around the sidearm, but his finger didn't move to the trigger. He couldn't just leave her here, couldn't let her die, even though every part of his training screamed at him to finish the job. The warrior's eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch between them. She didn't speak. Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come out. She was barely conscious, her face twisted in pain, her body shaking. He hesitated, but only for a moment. He couldn't leave her like this. Moving quickly, Elias dropped to one knee beside her. The alien's blood, dark and thick, was everywhere, but Elias didn't care. He ripped open his first aid pack, his hands shaking slightly as he worked. She winced as he applied pressure to the worst of her injuries, her body trembling with the effort of trying to stay conscious. Hey, stay with me," Elias muttered, his voice low but firm. He didn't know if she understood him, but it didn't matter. He couldn't just leave her to die. For a moment, it looked like she might pass out completely, but then her eyes fluttered open again. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, and then something else, something more. A silent plea. Elias looked around. The planet was still dangerous, the wreckage offering no real shelter. They had to move. Now. He lifted the warrior into his arms with surprising ease, considering the state of both of them. Her body was light but stiff, like a broken machine that still had a spark of life left in it. She groaned softly, her alien physiology barely holding together. "Hold on," Elias said softly, more to himself than to her. He had no idea where he was going, but he had to move. He had to get her out of the open before whatever had left her in this state caught up with them. He didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like an eternity, the landscape stretching endlessly before him. He kept his eyes trained ahead, his instincts telling him that something was coming, something dangerous. The feeling of being watched had never been stronger, but Elias didn't stop. He couldn't. There was something about this warrior, about her pain, her suffering. He could feel her heartbeat, a strange rhythm that connected them. even though they were enemies, and that was what disturbed him the most. He couldn't explain why he cared, why he'd made the choice to save her. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Maybe it was the knowledge that if he left her here, she'd be dead in moments. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because she reminded him of something he'd been fighting for all along: survival. They found shelter in an old cave system hours later. Far from the wreckage, Elias laid the warrior down, his body aching from the effort. She barely stirred, her breathing shallow but steady. Elias set to work once again, trying to stabilize her wounds. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. What had happened to her? Why had she been left to die in this forsaken place? The answers would come eventually, he told himself. But first, they had to survive, and survive they would, no matter what it took. Unlikely Elias, the darkness inside the cave was stifling, but it offered shelter from the storm outside. Elias could hear the wind howling through the craggy rocks, the shrieks of the planet's strange wildlife echoing in the distance. It was a far cry from the chaos of the battlefield, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like they were safe. But Elias knew better. He couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. He glanced over at the alien warrior lying on the stone floor. She was still unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. The blood had stopped flowing from her wounds, and Elias had done everything he could to stabilize her. For now, she was alive. That was all that mattered. That Elias sat against the cave wall, staring out into the darkness. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had never been one to question his orders, but everything about this mission felt wrong. The battle, the destruction, it didn't add up. Why had the Zalith warriors attacked this outpost with such force? What had they been running from? And most importantly, why had he decided to save this alien warrior? Elias shook his head, frustrated by the unanswered questions. He couldn't let himself get distracted. He needed to focus on the here and now. Survival was the only thing that mattered. He took a deep breath and checked the warrior's vitals once more. She was still unconscious, but there was a flicker of life in her. Her skin, though alien, was warm to the touch, and her heartbeat had steadied. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility for her, despite the fact that she was the enemy. Suddenly, the warrior stirred. Elias jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. The warrior's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they locked onto his. Her expression was unreadable, her alien features sharp and striking. She was still disoriented, but there was an unmistakable fire in her gaze. "You're awake," Elias said, his voice soft but firm. The warrior made a low, strangled noise as she had tried to move, but her body was clearly in pain. She winced, her eyes squeezing shut, as if the effort of even breathing hurt. Elias crouched down beside her. "Easy. You've been through a lot. Don't try to move." The alien's eyes narrowed, as she slowly turned her head to look at him. There was a moment of silence, a long, tense pause as they both processed the strange situation they found themselves in. "Why?" the warrior rasped, her voice weak but defiant. "Why did you save me?" Elias didn't answer immediately. The question was complicated, and he wasn't sure he had an answer that would make sense. He had saved her because something inside him, something deep and instinctual, had told him to, but he couldn't explain it. "I couldn't leave you to die," Elias said finally. "We both have to survive, and right now, you need me." The warrior's eyes flickered with suspicion. "I need nothing from you," she spat, her voice raw with anger. Elias straightened up, feeling a mix of frustration and sympathy. He understood why she felt that way. She was a warrior, proud and strong, and the idea of depending on a human for survival likely grated on her sense of honor. But the fact remained that she was in no position to fight or escape. They were both stranded on this hostile world, and they had to work together if they had any hope of getting out alive. "You may not need me, but I need you," Elias said, his voice steady. "If we're going to survive out here, we need to work together. You can't do it alone, and neither can I." The warrior's lips curled into a snarl. "You think you can trust me?" Elias met her gaze evenly. "No, but I'm willing to give you a chance, for now." The warrior seemed to consider this for a moment. Then, with a grimace, she closed her eyes again and let her head fall back onto the cold stone floor. "I will not betray you, yet." Elias didn't respond. There was no point in arguing. She was right to be distrustful. If the roles were reversed, he would be no different. But right now, they were both survivors, and they had a common goal: to live long enough to figure out what had gone wrong, and find a way out of this hellhole. The cave was silent for a long while. Elias sat back against the wall, keeping his eyes on the warrior as she rested. The dim light from the cave's narrow entrance barely illuminated the scene, but he could make out the sharp angles of her alien features. She was unlike any creature he had ever encountered. Her skin was a pale blue, almost translucent in places, and her body was sleek and powerful despite the devastating injuries she had sustained. Her eyes, large and luminous, spoke of intelligence and wisdom, and Elias couldn't help but wonder what her life had been like before this battle. But no matter how much he wondered, he knew he would never truly understand. They were from different worlds, different species, and yet here they were, bound together by circumstance. Elias leaned forward, checking the warrior's wounds again. The wounds were still healing, but they wouldn't be enough to save her. If they didn't get her proper medical attention, they needed to leave the cave as soon as she was stable enough to travel. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that leaving wasn't going to be that simple. The sound of distant footsteps broke the silence. Ilias's heart raced as he instantly moved to the edge of the cave, peering out into the darkness. He couldn't see anything, but he could hear them, heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching from the direction of the wreckage. The enemy, they were coming for them. Elias quickly turned to the warrior. She was still unconscious, but the expression on her face had shifted. The fear and pain had been replaced by something darker, something more primal. "They know we're here," Elias muttered under his breath. "We have to move. Now." He didn't wait for her response. He grabbed her, lifting her into his arms once more, ignoring the protests of his tired muscles. The warrior was heavier than she looked, but Elias didn't care. He had to get her out of here. He had to keep them both alive. The cave entrance was narrow, and Elias had to move carefully to avoid making noise. The distant footsteps grew louder, the sound echoing off the stone walls, sending shivers down Elias's spine. He knew the enemy was closing in. He could feel it as he moved deeper into the cave. He could hear the low growl of the alien's voice, barely audible but filled with menace. "You cannot hide from them forever." "I know," Elias said, his voice low, "but we'll take our chances." They had no other choice. The cave system twisted and turned, its narrow passages offering little more than a temporary refuge. Elias's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He couldn't afford to be caught here, not with the warrior in her condition. He had to get them to higher ground, somewhere they could defend themselves. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shook, the walls trembled with the force of an explosion, and Elias stumbled, barely managing to keep his footing. The sound of the blast echoed through the cave, followed by the unmistakable hum of alien technology. They were coming. The enemy had found them. Dark shadows in the dark. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, sending jagged rocks scattering across the cave floor. Elias braced himself, instinctively tightening his grip on the alien warrior he carried. She was heavier now, her body limp in his arms, her head leaning against his shoulder. The fear and desperation were written across her features, even though she was barely conscious. "Stay with me," Elias muttered, his voice low and urgent. His eyes scanned the darkness around them, searching for any signs of movement. The tremors had stopped, but the silence that followed was unnerving. He knew the enemy was close, just beyond the walls of the cave, and if they didn't move quickly, it would be their last stand. His mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. They couldn't stay in the cave for much longer. They needed to find a way to get out of the immediate danger zone. But Elias had no idea what lay beyond the cave system, and the prospect of facing whatever had attacked the outpost was terrifying. Yet, retreating into the caves meant certain death. The warrior shifted in his arms, groaning softly, her eyes flickering open for a brief moment. Elias glanced down at her, his breath caught in his chest. He had no idea how long she would remain conscious. She had lost a lot of blood, and her injuries were severe. But somehow, she was still alive, still fighting. "I'll carry you, as long as I can," he said, more to reassure himself than her. She didn't respond, but Elias could feel her body tense as if she were trying to gather strength. The alien warrior had a fire within her, an unyielding will to survive. Elias continued moving, his boots scraping against the rough stone as he made his way deeper into the cave system. The walls seemed to close in on him with every step, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The blast earlier had come from the direction of the wreckage, and it wasn't the first time he had felt this strange, oppressive force closing in on them. Something was hunting them, something far more dangerous than just the Zalith invaders. Elias could feel it in his bones, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up as the tension in the air grew unbearable. "We're being watched," the warrior said suddenly, her voice weak but sharp. Elias froze, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean, there's ... a presence? I've felt it since we entered the cave." Her voice trailed off, as if she were struggling to hold on to consciousness. "It's not the Zaloth. They are nothing compared to this." Elias' blood ran cold. He had never heard the warrior speak with such fear in her voice. If she, one of the fiercest fighters he had ever encountered, was scared, then the threat they were facing was something beyond his understanding. He looked around again, his senses on high alert. The shadows of the cave seemed to stretch unnaturally, flickering in the dim light as if they were alive. He could feel something watching them from the depths. Something far older and more dangerous than any alien warrior. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle, but his mind raced. What was it? What was hunting them? "Stay close," he said, his voice firm. "We need to keep moving." They had reached a large chamber, the walls covered in strange, ancient carvings that Elias couldn't understand. The air was colder here, and a low hum filled the space, reverberating through his bones. It felt like the very ground was alive, pulsing with an energy he couldn't comprehend. The warrior's breathing had become erratic, her body trembling in his arms. Elias could feel the warmth of her blood seeping through his armor, and the reality of her condition hit him harder than before. She was running out of time. "We need to find a way out of here," Elias muttered, his eyes scanning the chamber. He wasn't sure if they would make it much longer. The Zalith might have been deadly, but whatever had attacked this planet, whatever was lurking in the darkness, was far more dangerous. As he turned to look for an exit, a sharp noise pierced the silence. Elias froze, his body going tense. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, but something far worse, a scraping, like claws against stone. It was coming closer. Elias' instincts kicked in, and he pressed himself against the wall, holding the warrior as still as possible. The noise grew louder, echoing through the chamber, and Elias felt his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever it was moving toward them, slow and deliberate. Without warning, something darted past the edge of his vision. He spun around, his rifle raised, but there was nothing there, just shadows, stretching across the walls. Elias cursed under his breath. He knew they were being hunted, but he couldn't see the predator. Then, the shadows in the corner of the chamber began to move. They slithered and writhed, taking on shapes that made no sense, shifting, pulsing, like living darkness. Elias' breath caught in his throat. He had never seen anything like it before, and in the midst of the shadows, Elias saw something worse, a set of glowing eyes, burning with an otherworldly light, peering out from the darkness. The warrior stiffened in his arms, her body going rigid as she recognized the creature. "It's the Zero," she whispered, her voice filled with a kind of reverence and terror. "The Ancient Ones. The predators that once ruled this world." Elias couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Zero were a legend, an ancient race that the Zalith feared. No one had seen them in millennia, but here they were alive, watching, waiting. "You need to run," the warrior urged weakly, her voice growing faint. "You cannot fight them. No one can." Elias shook his head, his jaw set in determination. "I'm not leaving you." The warrior didn't have the strength to argue. She could only manage a weak, desperate look as the shadows around them seemed to pulse with malicious intent. The glowing eyes of the Zero grew brighter, and Elias could feel the temperature in the room drop, as if the very air was being sucked out by their presence. The Zero began to move, their bodies stretching and shifting, like liquid darkness. Their long, clawed limbs scraped against the walls as they approached. Elias knew they didn't have much time left. Whatever the Zero were, they were predators, and they had only one goal to hunt. "Stay behind me," Elias commanded, his voice low but firm. But the warrior could only offer a weak nod. She was barely able to hold her head up, let alone fight. Elias took a step forward, raising his rifle and aiming into the shifting mass of shadows. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He had never faced anything like this before, and he wasn't sure how to fight it, but he wouldn't go down without a fight. The Zero rushed toward them with terrifying speed, the shadows lashing out like tendrils of night. Elias fired his shots, piercing the darkness, but they didn't seem to slow the creatures down. The bullets passed through them like smoke, disappearing into the void. The warrior let out a strangled cry. It's useless. You can't kill them. Elias' heart sank. He knew she was right, but he wasn't giving up yet. Then we run, he said, his voice tight with urgency. He turned, pulling the warrior with him, but the shadows were closing in fast. The Zero were everywhere now, surrounding them on all sides. The darkness pressed in, suffocating and oppressive. Elias could feel the weight of it, like a physical force. The shadows were everywhere, crawling up the walls, slithering toward them. There was no escape. The heart of the darkness. Elias could feel his heart pounding, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The shadows were closing in faster now, swirling around them with a menacing intelligence. Every inch of the cave felt like it was alive, breathing, watching. His grip tightened around his rifle, though his mind screamed that it was useless. These creatures, these Zero, could not be killed by mere bullets. They were something ancient, something beyond his comprehension. Move, he hissed, pulling the alien warrior along as he ran deeper into the cave. He had no idea where he was going anymore, just that they had to get away from the shadows that seemed to stretch out to consume them. The Zero were relentless, an unstoppable force that would not rest until they had hunted their prey to extinction. The warrior's breathing had become more labored, her body growing heavier in his arms. Elias knew she was at the end of her strength, but he refused to give up on her. The Zero were terrifying, but he had faced death before and he wasn't about to let it take them both. The cave narrowed as they continued forward, the walls squeezing tighter with every step. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The further they ventured, the more claustrophobic it felt, like the cave itself was drawing them into its depths. Its maw. They turned a corner, and Elias nearly stumbled as he nearly collided with the cave's wall. The ground was uneven, and the shadows seemed to follow their every movement. But there was something else, something that caught his attention. A faint glimmer of light ahead. Do you see that? He asked, his voice tight with disbelief. The warrior's eyes flickered open, her gaze weak but still sharp. She nodded faintly. It's a way out, but we need to be careful. This place is a labyrinth. Elias didn't need more explanation. He was more than willing to take his chances with an unknown path if it meant a chance at survival. They continued on, their steps hurried but cautious. The light ahead grew brighter, casting an eerie glow across the walls. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air felt, as if the cave was holding its breath, waiting for something. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn towards something that had been waiting for them. As they drew closer to the source of the light, the temperature seemed to drop further, and the walls began to hum with a strange energy. The warrior stiffened in his arms, her head lifting slightly as if she could sense it too. This place is ancient, she whispered. I can feel the power here. It's overwhelming. Elias didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew she was right. This cave, this labyrinth, wasn't just a random hideout. It was something more, something far older than the Zalith or the Zero. It was a place of power. A place that had been buried for eons. The light was almost blinding. Now, a pulsing energy that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. They reached the source, and Elias' eyes widened in shock at what he saw. In the center of the chamber was a massive stone structure, its surface covered in strange marking symbols that were completely alien to him. The structure pulsed with the same eerie light, and Elias could feel the energy radiating from it, humming through his body. It's a beacon, the warrior said, her voice distant as she struggled to keep her eyes open. A call, a signal. Elias looked around, his mind racing. He didn't know what the beacon was meant to do, but it felt like it had been waiting for something, or someone to activate it. The energy in the room was almost intoxicating, like a siren's call drawing them in. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, more violently than before. Elias gripped the stone structure for support, his heart hammering in his chest. Something was coming, something that would either save them or destroy them. The warrior groaned weakly, her eyes fluttering open again. We have to activate it, she whispered urgently. It's the only way. Elias turned to her, his breath quickening. How do we do that? I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But I can feel it. The power. It's connected to me, to us. We have to activate it, or the Zero will. She didn't finish the sentence, but Elias didn't need her to. He understood. The Zero were closing in, and if they didn't figure out how to use this beacon, they would die here. They both would. Ilias took a deep breath and stepped closer to the stone structure. His fingers brushed against the surface, and instantly, the room seemed to vibrate with energy. The symbols on the stone glowed brighter, and the hum grew louder, almost deafening. "I'm not going to let you die," Ilias muttered under his breath, as much for himself as for her. His hand pressed harder against the stone, and then, as if on instinct, the warrior moved. Her hand weakly touched the structure beside his, and when it did, the energy in the room exploded. The light was blinding now, overwhelming, as the beacon came to life with a deafening roar. The ground shook violently beneath them, and Elias, Bafta felt like it was being pulled apart by the sheer force of the energy. The walls of the cave cracked, the strange symbols on the stone glowing brighter and brighter as they hummed with a life of their own. The air was thick with power, and, for a moment, Elias thought they were going to be consumed by it. The warrior's body shuddered against him, her grip weakening, but she was still alive. She was still fighting. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the light and the sound vanished. The ground stopped trembling, and the energy in the room seemed to settle, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Elias gasped for air, his heart racing. He looked around, his senses alert for any sign of movement. The shadows that had been closing in on them moments before were gone. The Zero were no longer in pursuit, but they weren't safe yet. What just happened? Elias asked, his voice shaking with the weight of what they had just experienced. The warrior slowly lifted her head, her eyes wide with shock. The beacon, it did something. It's not just a signal, it's a weapon, a defense. Against the Zero? Elias asked, his voice filled with disbelief. She nodded weakly. Yes, the Zero never expected this. They thought they had control over this planet, over its secrets, but they were wrong. This place was meant to protect against them. It's a safeguard. Elias' mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. The beacon had activated, yes, but why? And why had it chosen them to be the ones to activate it? He didn't have answers. Not yet. But one thing was certain. The Zero were still out there, and now. They were aware of what had happened. They won't stop looking for us, the warrior whispered, her eyes flickering as she struggled to stay conscious. Not after this. They'll come, They'll come for the beacon. We can't let that happen, Elias said, his voice filled with resolve. We need to find a way to stop them, for good. The warrior nodded weakly. Then we have no choice. We must go to the heart of the planet, to the source. The source, Elias repeated. What do you mean? She didn't answer, her body going limp again in his arms. Elias had no choice but to carry her forward. They had survived the first wave, but the real fight was just beginning, and it would take them to places darker and more dangerous than either of them could ever imagine. Into the abyss cave walls seemed to close in as Elias and the warrior moved forward. Their journey had become an unspoken race, racing against time, against a Zero, and against their own limits. Every step they took felt heavier, like the ground itself was trying to drag them back. Ilias could feel the weight of the warriors, Bafta in his arms, the fragile state she was in. He had to push forward, though. They both had no choice. We're getting closer, the warrior whispered, her voice barely audible. I can feel it. The source. Elias didn't reply. His eyes scanned their surroundings, watching for any sign of danger. The narrow cave tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but it was clear they were moving deeper into the planet's core. The air grew colder, and the hum of the mysterious energy from the beacon still lingered in his veins. He wasn't sure if it was the beacon's power still coursing through him, or something else entirely, but a deep sense of urgency had settled in his chest. The Zero weren't far behind, and the closer they got to the source, the more dangerous their journey became. The planet was alive, and it was watching them. He could feel it in his bones. What exactly is the source? Elias asked, his voice low. He didn't want to distract her from the task at hand, but he needed to understand. What are we walking into? The warrior's eyes flickered as she struggled to stay conscious. It's hard to explain. The source is ancient. It's where the power of the planet lies. The Zero. They've been trying to control it for centuries, but they don't understand it. They only want to use it for destruction. Elias frowned. So, we're trying to stop them. Yes, she breathed, her grip on his arm weakening. But it's more than that. We're not just stopping them. We're trying to unlock the power to protect this world, and everyone in it. If we don't get to the source in time, the Zero will use it to destroy everything. Elias's mind raced. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. He had thought they were just running for their lives. Now, he realized they were racing to prevent an intergalactic disaster. As they moved deeper into the cave, the walls began to shift. Strange, intricate carvings appeared on the rock, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was as if the cave itself was alive, reacting to their presence. The symbols looked familiar to Elias, but they were far too alien to be understood. "They're marking our path," the warrior murmured, her voice filled with awe. "The energy, it's guiding us." Elias didn't know how the alien could sense it, but there was no doubt in his mind that the cave was guiding them in some way. The air grew thicker, heavier, like the planet was holding its breath. "We need to hurry," Elias urged, his grip tightening around the warrior's fragile form. He could see her struggling to keep up, but her resolve was still there. She wouldn't give up. Not now. They moved faster, pushing forward through the increasingly narrow tunnel. The walls seemed to press in, but Elias didn't care. All that mattered was reaching the source. If they didn't, everything they had been through would have been for nothing. As they rounded a corner, the path opened up into a massive chamber. The sheer size of it took Elias's breath away. The walls were covered in even more intricate carvings, and in the center of the room stood a towering structure, something that looked like a tree, but made entirely of stone and glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "That's it," the warrior gasped, her voice full of awe. "That's the source." Elias's eyes widened. He had expected something powerful, but he hadn't imagined this. The Tri-F, it could be called, that was alive in its own way. The light that emanated from it pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and the energy in the room seemed to vibrate with a strange kind of consciousness. "We're here," Elias whispered, his voice filled with wonder and fear. Before he could say another word, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Elias staggered, barely able to keep his balance, and the warrior let out a weak cry of alarm. The tremors grew stronger, and the air crackled with energy. Elias's instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. Something was coming. He looked up, and his eyes narrowed. The shadows around the tree began to twist and shift, as if alive. And then, they took shape. The Zero. They had found them. Elias pulled the warrior behind him, raising his rifle, but he knew it was pointless. The Zero were too powerful, too fast. They had been lying in wait, hiding in the shadows, ready for their moment to strike. "We have to activate it," the warrior gasped, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "We have no other choice." Elias didn't hesitate. He knew what she meant. They had come all this way for a reason. The source wasn't just a weapon, it was the key to defeating the Zero. He ran toward the glowing tree, reaching out to touch it, but before he could make contact, the Zero attacked. They came out of the shadows like phantoms, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Elias fired his rifle, but it didn't even slow them down. They were too quick, too relentless. The warrior screamed as one of them lunged at her, its claws slashing through the air. Elias didn't think. He reacted, charging at the nearest Zero and slamming his shoulder into it. The force of the impact sent the creature flying back, but it was only a momentary victory. More Zero closed in, their snarls filling the air. "Activate it," the warrior cried again. Now, with no other choice, Elias reached for the glowing tree once more. His fingers brushed against its surface, and a jolt of energy shot through his body. The room exploded with light, and the Zero shrieked in agony as the tree's power surged to life. Elias could feel the energy coursing through him, filling him with a strength he had never known. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble in response, and the Zero faltered, their bodies writhing as if in pain. The warrior's eyes widened in shock as the energy from the tree enveloped them both. "It's working," she breathed. It's stopping them." But just as the Zero faltered, they began to fight back with renewed fury. The room became a blur of movement as Elias and the warrior fought to hold their ground. The light from the tree was blinding now, but Elias couldn't let up. He had to stay focused. He had to protect the warrior. They had come too far to fail now. The Zero, weakened but still dangerous, began to regroup. Elias and the warrior fought side by side, their movements becoming more synchronized with every passing moment. The tree's energy continued to surge, pushing back the Zero with each wave. But Elias knew they couldn't hold on forever. The Zero were relentless, and the energy from the tree was starting to wane. They needed to find a way to finish this, to end the fight once and for all. With one final surge of energy, Elias reached out and grabbed the warrior's hand. Together, they channeled the power of the source into a single, concentrated blast. The Zero screamed in agony as the energy exploded outward, consuming them in a brilliant burst of light. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the battle was over. The last stand, the aftermath of the battle, left the chamber eerily quiet. Elias stood over the now destroyed remnants of the Zero, his breath heavy and labored. The tree's light pulsed faintly, as though the energy within it had been drained in the conflict. The warrior, though barely standing, leaned against him for support, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Elias looked at her, his face strained. "We did it. It's over." But the warrior shook her head slowly, her gaze distant. "No, Elias. The battle was just one part of the greater war. The Zero were only the beginning." He didn't know what to say. He had fought so hard, had risked everything, to save her, to stop the Zero, to protect the planet. The last thing he wanted to hear was that this was only the start. "What do you mean?" Elias asked, his voice a little sharper than he intended. He wiped the sweat off his brow and stared down at the warrior, his fingers trembling. "Isn't it over? We stopped the Zero. The source is safe." The warrior's eyes flickered with pain, but her voice was steady. "The Zero were never the true threat. They were just a tool, a weapon used by something much older, much darker. A force that's been in the shadows of the galaxy for centuries." Elias's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying?" "The source," she murmured, her hand weakly brushing the stone structure that stood at the center of the chamber. "It's more than just power. It's a beacon, a warning. And now that we've activated it, we've alerted something much worse." Elias felt the ground beneath him shift as the warrior's words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced. The source had been their hope, their salvation. How could it be a trap? "What do we do now?" Elias asked, his voice strained. The warrior slowly turned her head, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of determination and resignation. "We find a way to stop it, to shut it down, before the real threat arrives." For the first time in their journey, Elias wasn't sure if they could win. He looked at the warrior, her body weak, her spirit battered, and he wondered how much longer they could keep going. But one thing was certain, they couldn't stop now. "We have no choice," Elias said, gritting his teeth. "We finish this." The warrior nodded, though she seemed to struggle with the decision. Her legs were still weak from the battle, and her wounds hadn't healed. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep fighting, but her resolve was unshakable. She had to see this through. Together, they moved toward the source, feeling the pull of its energy once more. The warrior's hand pressed against the tree-like structure, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols etched into its surface. She looked at Elias with a mixture of fear and understanding. "We have to destroy it," she whispered. Elias's throat went dry. "What do you mean?" "This is the source of all the power. How can we destroy it?" The warrior's voice was grave. "It's not a matter of destruction. It's a matter of containment. The power here is too dangerous. If we let it fall into the wrong hands, if we let it stay active, it will bring about the end of everything." Elias looked at her, uncertain. They had come so far. Hadn't they already fought to protect the source? Wasn't this all supposed to be about saving the galaxy, not destroying the key to its future? "What happens if we don't?" Elias asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "If we don't stop it," the warrior's voice trembled, "everything will be consumed. The energy here, it was never meant to be used. It's too powerful, too volatile, and now that we've activated it, it will begin to call out to others. Worse things than the Zero will come." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around the chamber, his eyes darting to the flickering lights of the source. The hum of the energy still buzzed in the air, like a constant reminder of their proximity to something beyond comprehension. "How do we stop it?" Elias demanded, his voice rising. He could feel the tension building in the air, thickening around them like a storm. "What do we do?" The warrior took a deep breath, her eyes closing for a moment as if searching within herself for the strength to continue. "There's a way," she whispered, "but it's risky. It will require both of us together. We'll have to merge our energy with the source, use its power against itself." Elias's heart pounded. "That sounds insane." "It is," she agreed, her voice shaking, "but it's the only way." The source is a living entity, one that feeds off of the energy we give it. If we can channel our energy into it, we can make it burn out. We can stop it from calling for more. The idea sounded almost impossible. Ilias's mind raced with doubt. But then, looking at the warrior, he knew there was no other choice. They had come too far. The fate of the galaxy, even the universe, was in their hands. If they didn't act, it could all be lost. Ilias nodded. Let's do it. They moved closer to the source, their bodies nearly touching the stone structure. The energy from the source grew stronger, and Ilias could feel it pulling at him, tugging at his very being. His heart pounded in his chest, his pulse racing with the fear and adrenaline of the moment. The warrior placed her hands on the structure first, her fingers splayed wide. Ilias followed, placing his palms against hers. The instant they connected, a surge of energy shot through their bodies, as if the very fabric of the universe was being torn apart and remade around them. It was like being pulled into the heart of a storm. The energy surged within them, growing more intense with each passing second. Ilias's breath caught in his throat as the power of the source wrapped around him, filling him with a strange, overwhelming sensation. His body felt like it was burning from the inside out, but he didn't dare pull away. He had to hold on. Beside him, the warrior gritted her teeth, her face contorted in pain as the energy flowed through her. "Stay with me," she said through clenched teeth. "We have to hold on." Ilias could feel her struggle, but he refused to let her go. They both channeled the energy of the source, focusing on it, pushing it back. The hum of the power grew louder, the vibrations shaking the very ground beneath them. Ilias felt like he was losing himself, but he pressed on, determined to finish this. "I can hold on. Much longer," the warrior whispered. Ilias clenched his jaw, the fire of the energy almost too much to bear. He could see her starting to fade, her grip weakening. She was barely conscious, but she was still holding on, still fighting. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't let her down. "I've got you," Ilias said, his voice firm. He reached for the deepest part of himself, the part that still had the strength to fight. He drew on everything he had, everything he was, and with one final surge, he pushed the energy back into the source. The light exploded in a flash of blinding brilliance, and then silence. The chamber was still. Ilias fell to his knees, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. The warrior collapsed beside him, gasping for breath, her body weak but alive. "Did we do it?" Ilias asked, his voice hoarse. The warrior nodded slowly, her eyes filled with relief and exhaustion. "Yes," she whispered, "it's over." But Ilias knew it wasn't just the source that had been destroyed. It was the idea of endless power, the dangerous temptation that came with it. They had stopped something far worse than the zero. They had stopped the galaxy from being consumed by its own darkness. Ilias helped the warrior to her feet, his arms steadying her. Together, they walked out of the chamber, the echoes of their footsteps the only sound in the vast, silent cavern. The galaxy was safe for now. The final lesson. In that moment, Ilias realized something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. True power wasn't about control. It wasn't about using others to achieve your own goals. It was about sacrifice. It was about knowing when to step back, when to let go, and when to protect what truly mattered. Their journey had started with the simple desire to survive, but in the end, it had taught them a deeper lesson, that the greatest power is not in the source, but in the strength of the choices you make. The universe was a vast, mysterious place, and in it, survival wasn't guaranteed. But perhaps, just perhaps, the ability to make the right choice could change everything. The end.